Florida Senator Rick Scott appeared to buck Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell yesterday, blowing past the GOP veteran and releasing his own agenda for 2022 and beyond. The plan boasts strong positions on a variety of hot-button culture war issues, as well as several mainstay Republican takes on topics like the debt ceiling and national voter ID laws. Dubbed the 11-point plan to rescue America, Scott leans heavily into the debate over school curriculum, writing, quote, "Our kids will say the Pledge of Allegiance, salute the flag, learn that America is a great country, and choose the school that best fits them. We will inspire patriotism and stop teaching the revisionist history of the radical left. Public schools will focus on the 3 R's, not indoctrinate children with critical race theory or any other political ideology."
The agenda dives into a number of other topics. Scott repeatedly takes aim at socialism and the left, writing, quote, "Socialism will be treated as a foreign combatant which aims to destroy our prosperity and our freedom." Notably, the agenda makes virtually no mention of the pandemic or of lockdowns, and Scott only makes 2 passing references to vaccine mandates. Former President Donald Trump, however, is mentioned 4 times. Scott writes that the U.S. must continue the construction of a wall along the southern border and name it after President Trump. Here to weigh in is our rising panel. Rebecca Azor is a political journalist, and Denise Long is a business consultant and contributor at Newsweek. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Good to be here. Thank you.
So Denise, what is your read on this proposal? I mean, beside the obvious, it's a love letter to Trump. It's named in the plan. I mean, so much policy just to get one man to notice you. But what do you make of it more generally?
Well, clearly it's an indication that the Republican Party is still embracing Donald Trump and him being the sort of front runner, at least thought leader about the party's agenda. I think the plan has some very solid points. I need to see some things built out. There are some ways in which it my biggest concern, among other things, is its neglect of race, or the specific ways in which it talks about a colorblind approach to things. And we know from research that a colorblind approach to addressing racism is not the way to go. I would like to see Mr. Scott revisit this plan. And actually, if we're going to look for a race-neutral society, we need to account for the ways in which for the last 400 years, we've had not just a race-apparent society, but a race-informed society. So I embrace the idea of small government, but there's a process to get there. So this would be a plan that would need to expand multiple years and would need to have the government be very specific about the processes and metrics that it is going to use to get us to a colorblind society, or I would think really a race-neutral society where your race doesn't predict your experience of life in America. And we aren't there yet. And it's naive to suggest that we are.
And Rebecca, the reason that this made news is that Rick Scott isn't just a backbench senator; he's the chair of the political arm that runs Senate races for Republicans, the NRSC. And so this is sort of seen as the blueprint for what Republicans are running on. And Mitch McConnell had said, "Don't give them a blueprint for what you're running on, because it's just going to tick the people off who don't support it. It's better to just run as not being Democrats." And so I think Rick Scott sort of made Mitch McConnell's case for him, because he introduced this, and you have a ton of people, angry at what's in it. The thing that has people the angriest, he said, they're going to do tax policy such that every American is going to be paying taxes. Right now, roughly half the country doesn't earn enough income to pay taxes at all. And so that means a tax increase on half of the country, which he's now denying. He's saying, I didn't mean it that way. But his plan is quite specific that would be the result of it. What was your reaction? It almost felt like Mitt Romney and his 47% moment, again, just kind of translated into this new document.
Yeah, and when he talked about taxes, I think that what he did was try to sneak it in, right? He drops this 11-point plan that really, to me, was only focusing on gender and things. But he had that little moment where he put in for taxes and basically saying that more Americans need to have skin in the game. Is that the kind of conversation? Is that the kind of rhetoric that you want to give to your constituents, the people that are following you, trying to get people on board? And, knowing that he stood against what was supposed to be the most powerful person and who should have been the one dropping these points, he, to me, just shows that he doesn't care about the people, taxing people who don't even make enough at all to live. Somebody who is a representative of Florida should understand, even with the rising cost of living in Florida, right? How about that? You want to tax those people, low income families. What does that mean to them? What does that mean to them to have to continue to or be taxed and have to think about living? This is a state, he's a representative of a state that doesn't even care about moving forward with rising the cost of wages, yet living there is almost practically impossible. A report showed that in the last 6 months, Florida homes have risen faster than any other state in America. But he wants to talk about taxing people. Is this somebody that we really think is fit to lead? I mean, look at his track record. And I think he's just doing this for his bid again to have Donald Trump look at him, because we know how Donald Trump likes to tax. So this is going to be something that I think he's going to believe that Donald Trump looks at and says, this Rick Scott is the guy for possible 2024.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that the first bullet point focuses on education, a sign that, this is the main Republican thrust for the future is, critical race theory, the kind of, you didn't, I think, specifically mention pandemic restrictions, but parental frustration about how the schools worked during the pandemic with, school choice being put forth as the solution. That's a very typical Republican kind of policy, but I think one that maybe has new energy behind it, given the really, I think, bipartisan or cross-ideological consensus that schools really did screw up. Denise, what do you think that says about what Republicans are prioritizing?
Yeah, so education is obviously very important. We're preparing the next generation of leaders, of workers, right, of stakeholders and decision makers in our country. So that's very important. I also want people to really recognize what we ask schools to do. We basically ask schools to completely shift the ways in which administrators and everyone have been taught how to do education. How do you teach kindergartners when we are in a pandemic and they are supposed to be at home with parents who go to work when their students were at home? So we have to realize that there is a learning moment. There was a learning curve with all of this. And what we should be doing is planning for how we do it better, right? There are ways in which schools absolutely messed up and could have learned, but there are ways in which the system itself apparently hasn't learned about how to support schools should another pandemic happen, or if this one should continue. So it needs to. Now, my concern with the education piece is the ways in which this CRT has been turned into this straw man sort of boogeyman kind of thing. And what I'd like to see educators do is, once again, learn from this social moment, this cultural moment in our society where we are finally addressing racism head on. And instead of denying race again, I would love for them to actually look at how do we design professional education, professional development, teacher pre-service education. So we're not having the same conversation about race every generation. So education is important, but how we learn from where we've been in the past is equally as important. And I don't see them doing that. And if the Republican Party is going to become the grand old party that it could be, and if it's not going to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, they're going to have to embrace that. Do white voters, Republican voters, need to see race being denied in order for them to think America's moving forward when it's not?
And Scott also took aim in a way at Social Security, saying there should be, quote, no government assistance unless you are disabled or aggressively seeking work. If you can work but refuse to work, you cannot live off of the hard work and sweat of your fellow Americans. Rebecca, does he understand that would seem to apply to Social Security? I mean, maybe he would argue that he's not trying to suggest that Social Security is part of that, but it certainly would fit that criteria.
Okay, if we look at this whole 11-point plan, in my opinion, there's nothing really that makes any sense to me. I think what he's saying and what he's doing is putting a certain group of people. Of course, Social Security fits the criteria for that. People who are on Social Security fit the criteria for that. But he's trying to put certain people outside of that box. And we know his history, even with healthcare. This is somebody who doesn't care about the disabled. To me, this is somebody who doesn't care about people who are looking to get aid for care, any kind of aid for Medicare, for Medicaid, for any assistance. I don't think he puts that in his mind. We can tell from the way, to me, this plan was put together. I think it was put together to actually just grab the attention of those people who are Trump supporters, right? We still have longstanding Trump supporters. And I think the idea of saying that if you can't get up and work, if you can't get up and do this, then you don't deserve to take the hard-earned money of X, Y, and Z. But people like Rick Scott every day take our hard-earned money and utilize it and live off of it, and then drop points like this. So to me, in my honest opinion, I think that, again, he just dropped something that sounds good, is going to appeal to Trump supporters, to possibly Trump himself, but a lot of things are not sticking. There are a lot of gray areas in these, and especially with that.
Yeah, and Denise, can we underscore some of the hypocrisy here for just 1 second? So Rick Scott is saying that he's going to take on the half of the country that he says has no skin in the game, a bunch of shiftless, lazy people who are just living off the dole. Rick Scott himself, at his company, oversaw what is arguably the largest Medicare fraud in American history. Like he talks about having self-funded his campaign. He didn't self-fund his campaign. He funded his campaign with Medicare money that was siphoned from the system. Ended up paying a gigantic fine. So the idea that he would be the guy that's going to talk to us about personal responsibility is
another hypocrisy in it. There's this section on socialism is bad, enemy combatant, can't have socialism. Okay, I agree. I don't like socialism. And then the next section is all about how all companies must have only American workers, and
he's going to nationalize all the companies and tell them how to run their business.
Socialism is when the government manages the economy to a very broad degree. Micromanages the economy and says what kind of labor is good or not. Like that's exactly what they're calling for this only American worker thing.
But yeah, Denise, his entire career is on the back of Medicare fraud. Like, how are we listening to this guy?
To call out.
Yeah.
Right. That's a very interesting hypocrisy to call out. I am really pleased that a plan came out. I was frightened when they said they didn't want to, they wanted to run on the idea of not being Democrats. That's just not sufficient. So I'm glad he put this forward so people can chew on it and then they can give feedback, and hopefully he'll listen and learn and modify it as he should, as all elected should. So, this idea that the American people having a social safety net for when stuff happens that disrupts our economy or their lives, hello, COVID-19, that they shouldn't have anything to fall back on. The idea that we should destroy our social safety net instead of fixing the holes in it and making it work more effectively and efficiently is just kind of silly. And to me, it's just grandstanding. So, and there are ways in which the government needs to, for example, mandate E-Verify for all employers so that we can ensure that people who are in our country are here legally, and that employers who are fostering and facilitating illegal immigration and or visa overstays are penalized. The American workers wouldn't be so dependent on our social safety net if we hadn't increased, our native-born population by 60 million after the civil rights legislation, right? If we weren't letting so many people just run across our borders and overstay their visas, the American people would be holding those jobs. So I think there are ways in which we need to be really honest and real about these talking points that people put out, and they need to put more meat behind how they're actually going to do it. And I want to see the metrics for the impact that they have.
Well, thank you both for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
No, thank you for having us.
Coming up next, host of the Bad Faith podcast and former Bernie Sanders press secretary, Brianna Joy Gray, will join us to discuss the truckers heading to Washington, D.C. Stay with us.